There's a very old story about Asians and Asians in America. It begins as a story about the Chinese, who are once called the sick men of Asia. In this story, they're a contagion, impure, forever foreign, needing to be purged. In this story, a pandemic comes in the form of a people. At the beginning of the 20th century, San Francisco's top health official and physician said that the Chinese would, quote, breed and engender disease wherever they reside. When the bubonic plague spread, officials built a wall around Chinatown to seal in the Chinese. But when the plague continued to spread across the city, they seriously discussed burning Chinatown to the ground. This story of the diseased Oriental was key to the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first time in U.S. history that a group had been banned, a racial group had been banned from immigrating. And this story drove the white mobs who violently purged Asians from their segregated settlements and lynched them. From then to now, this story didn't just cause violence against Chinese, but against Filipinos, Japanese, South Asians, Southeast Asians, and so many others of us. So when political leaders began using phrases like the Chinese virus or the Kung flu, they were hardly being original. They were drawing on a story that went back centuries and that it had deadly consequences. Now, in this moment, we've all had too many fresh reminders that hatred, anger, and fear are too easy to stir up, but very hard to suppress. And yet, even in these times when we're all too often reminded of what the worst is that we can be, we have also seen the best of what we can be. We've seen 26 million people in the streets marching for Black lives. We've seen millions standing along Asians and Pacific Islanders. We've seen acts of kindness. We've seen acts of sacrifice. We've seen acts of grace. In a word, we've seen solidarity. Solidarity is such a beautiful word because within it are so many other beautiful words. Care, fairness, generosity, justice, equity, mutuality, community. But we also recognize that the stories of solidarity are not the kinds of stories that have been told so much in these times. So last year, after the mass shootings in Atlanta and Indianapolis, dozens of us, Asians and Pacific Islanders, filmmakers, writers, poets, performers, artists, designers, cultural strategists, came together. We knew we needed to stop AAPI hate. But we asked ourselves, what do we want to start? What kind of world do we want to build? And that's how we came to launch the May 19th project. Solidarity is an act of commitment, and it's a leap of faith. The notion of the Asian American itself came about because of solidarity. In the 1800s, as white leaders debated excluding Chinese, it was Frederick Douglass, a former slave, who gave the most profound defense of them. He wrote, "I want a home here not only for the Negro, the mulatto, and the Latin races, but I want the Asiatic to find a home here in the United States and feel at home here, both for his sake and for ours." Commitment. Douglass and others in the Black freedom movement had imagined citizenship for all, an ideal that was finally secured in the 14th Amendment, which made imaginable the right of all immigrants to become naturalized and birthright citizenship for all the children born on this soil. It's the reason that we're here. From that time, Asians and Pacific Islanders of very different backgrounds shared traumas of mistaken identity, enforced labor, imposed segregation, and brutal violence. So by the late 1960s, young people of Asian descent had begun to call themselves Asian American. The notion that such diverse peoples with different languages, religions, different ways of life, some of whom had even fled conflicts with each other, that they all shared something in common was in fact a leap of faith. From the start, the words Asian American and Pacific Islander were not meant to merely signify a census category. They were acts of solidarity. And over the last half century, we've built Asian Pacific America through shared experiences of food, of music, of religion, of custom, and culture. Solidarity begins as a necessity for people to find belonging, safety, and peace. But then it powers the building of vital, healthy, generous communities. And these were the kinds of stories that we needed to tell. Stories of struggle and aid, stories of belonging and joy. When it came time to name the project, we quickly settled on the examples of two close friends and freedom fighters, Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X. Yuri and Malcolm shared a birthday, May 19th, and they also shared a commitment to solidarity, to making a world where everyone could be free. Yuri was born and raised in San Pedro, California, but when she was 19, after Pearl Harbor, her father was targeted and likely tortured by the FBI, and he died soon after. Then she was incarcerated in Jerome, Arkansas, one of 120,000 Japanese Americans who were rounded up and placed in concentration camps during World War II. After the war, she moved to Harlem and began organizing with her neighbors for integrated schools and civil rights. That's where she met Malcolm X. They became fast friends and challenged each other's perspectives. In the last year of Malcolm's life, as his thinking about racial justice was evolving, the two were in constant dialogue about how to change the world. So on May 19th, 2021, we began releasing 14 videos, day by day, telling stories of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders working in solidarity across ethnicity, race, class, gender, and generation. Stories that spanned 150 years. They include the story of San Francisco's Fillmore District, where Black, Filipino, Japanese, and Jewish families made the fertile ground for Sugar Pie DeSanto and Etta James to change the direction of rhythm and blues. The story of the student strike at San Francisco State University that led to the creation of ethnic studies. The story of a Hmong American woman named Yua Vang Lee, whose son was killed by Minneapolis police, who heard George Floyd call out for his mother, and who decided to urge Asians and Pacific Islanders to stand for Black lives. The truth is that our lives have always been characterized more by acts of interdependence, mutuality, and joy than by acts of division, segregation, and hatred. Our circle of care always extends further than we think. Our impulse to take care of one another is deeper in us than we think. So how do we rebuild together? Solidarity is the work of seeing each other, of standing together, of acting for each other. Solidarity is our shared past, and solidarity is our shared future. I want to close with a video, the last in our series here, of a poet, an Oakland poet named Michelle Lee, who's the executive director of You Speaks, and who does her poem, Dreaming America. Thank you for listening.
When we dream, we poke a hole into the sky of stories that says we are better off divided. We disrupt the American mythical parable that promises security in our separateness. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have always dreamt radically. Perhaps that's what's most important to know about who we be, is that we have been keenly suited to this sacred task of threading justice to joy, stories to solidarity, persistence to power, in our pursuit of freedom. And the pursuit for freedom has never been fought ourselves or alone, but we've always done this together, like Yua Vang Lee and Al Flowers.
We all come together, Asian, white, black.
You see, when we dream a new America. We carry the courage that once belonged to the giants whose shoulders we stand on today.
You don't choose the times you live in, but you do choose who you ought to be.
Wong Kim Ark and Frederick Douglass, a restaurant worker and abolitionist who helped make the path to citizenship possible for my grandparents and me.
No borders, no nations, no deeds.
We dream of a path to citizenship so we can actively participate in our American democracy.
When we dream, we remember the deep tradition of movement workers coming together across dividing lines to create a cultural response to racism that's rooted in power, healing, and solidarity. This is where dreams come from radical self-love and love for community. From stirrings like Bayard and striking like Itliog and Huerta and Chavez and Veracruz, from holding the humor and heartbreaks of this life and still waking up each morning with the humility of wonder. From radical self-love and radical friendships like Yuri and Malcolm, Grace and Jimmy, Bruce and Jesse, every dreamer knows that when we add ourselves to the collective, we are forever connected.